Here's a strange question. Why can you read? Not how. Why? Why did Europe fill up with books and readers when it did, and not a century sooner? The answer starts in the worst place imaginable. 1347, plague ships, the deadliest disaster Europe has ever known. This is the story of how the Black Death helped teach a continent to read. To understand what changed, you need to see the world before. In the early 1300s, every book in Europe was written by hand, every single one. A big book could take a scribe the better part of a year, hunched over a desk, copying line after line by candlelight. And the pages themselves were animal skin, parchment. One large Bible could use the skins of an entire herd, so a book cost about as much as a farm. Universities chained their books to the shelves. That's how precious they were. Most people would live and die without ever holding one. Knowledge was locked up tight. And then the ships came. October 1347. 12 trading galleys from the Black Sea sail into the harbor at Messina, in Sicily. The dock workers who rowed out to meet them found something wrong. Most of the sailors were dead. The rest were dying, marked with dark swellings, burning with fever. The ships were ordered out of the harbor. Too late. The sickness they carried moved with the rats, with the fleas, with the traders themselves. Within months, it was in Italy and France. Within a year, it was everywhere. Europe's trade routes, the veins of its wealth, became the roads the plague traveled. What followed was the deadliest disaster in European history. The plague burned through cities and villages for 5 years. Some places lost 4 people in 10. Some lost more than half. Whole villages simply stopped existing. Doors shut, fields abandoned, no one left to bury the dead. Nobody knows the exact toll. Historians still argue about it. Roughly a third of Europe, and by some estimates, closer to half. Stop and sit with that. A third of everyone, gone, in 5 years. And here's the strange part. The plague killed people, but it didn't touch the land, the tools, the coins, or the buildings. Everything Europe owned was still there. There were just far fewer hands left to work it. Remember that. It's the engine of everything that follows. Picture the harvest of 1349. The wheat is ripe. The fields are full. And the workers who used to bring it in, most of them are gone. Landowners stood at the edge of their fields and faced a problem their grandfathers never dreamed of. The land was worthless without hands to work it. For the first time in living memory, the powerful needed the poor more than the poor needed them. A laborer could walk off one manor and be welcomed at the next, no questions asked, and the workers figured that out fast. Wages took off. Landowners tried to outbid each other. Harvests can't wait. Workers asked for double, and got it. The rich were horrified. So in 1351, England's king signed the Statute of Laborers, a law that froze wages at pre-plague levels. Working for more became a crime. Other kingdoms passed laws just like it. Here's how well that worked. Court records fill up with workers fined for demanding and getting too much. Lords quietly paid the illegal rates anyway. The harvest doesn't care what the law says. You can't legislate away arithmetic. Within a generation, ordinary working families had money left over after the bread was bought. And what they spent it on is where this story takes its strangest turn. Historians call the decades after the plague the golden age of the laborer. Ordinary families ate better than their grandparents ever had. Meat on the table, better bread, and for the first time, proper clothes. Not one rough tunic worn until it fell apart. Real clothes bought new. The rich hated this too, by the way. They passed laws about what common people were allowed to wear. Laws written because peasants were dressing too well. Think about what that means. The people at the bottom of Europe had spending money. Keep your eye on those clothes. They matter more than anyone alive could have guessed. Now for the strangest link in this whole chain. And fair warning, this one's a theory, a serious one, but a theory. The clothes ordinary people were buying included linen, shirts, shifts, underclothes. the soft layer worn against the skin, and linen has an afterlife. It wears out, it gets patched, handed down, patched again, and finally it becomes rags. Book historians have long argued that in the decades after the plague, Europe slowly filled with worn-out linen. More shirts on more backs meant more rags in more rag carts, year after year. We can't measure it directly. No one was counting rag piles in 1380. But here's why it matters. Rags were the one raw material for something about to change the world. Because here's what a rag was worth in medieval Europe. Rags were what paper was made of, not wood. That comes centuries later. European paper was pounded linen. Water-powered mills hammered old rags into pulp, and skilled hands lifted that pulp into sheets, one by one. Now, to be fair, paper mills were spreading in Italy before the plague ever hit. The technology wasn't new, but paper lives and dies on its raw material. And as the rag supply swelled and mills multiplied across Italy, France, and Germany, paper got cheap, really cheap. By the 1400s, a sheet of paper cost about 1/6 of what parchment cost. Remember the Bible that needed a whole herd? Paper needed laundry. So paper was cheap, but books weren't. Because the page was never the expensive part. The scribe was. A big book still took one skilled human most of a year. And what happened to skilled wages after the plague? Same as everyone's, up. The historian David Herlihy argued that this squeeze pushed Europe toward machines. Fewer hands meant every labor-saving idea suddenly paid. Firearms, bigger ships with smaller crews. It's an argument, not a certainty. But the logic bites hardest with books. Cheap pages, expensive hands, a market full of paper, starved of copies. Europe didn't know it yet, but it was waiting for a machine. And in a city on the Rhine, a goldsmith was quietly building one. His name was Johannes Gutenberg, a goldsmith, a metalworker, and by every account we have, a man who bet everything on one idea. None of his machine's parts were new. Presses? Europe had squeezed wine and olives for centuries. Ink existed. Paper? Now cheap and everywhere. Gutenberg's genius was the letters. Individual metal letters, cast by the thousand, that could be arranged into any page, printed, then broken up and used again. Movable type. He spent years on it, in secret, and burned through a fortune that wasn't his. Borrowed money from a merchant named Johann Fust. That detail matters. A press was a business. It had to pay. Around 1450 in Mainz, the machine was ready. The proof came off that press around 1455. A Bible. The famous 42-line Bible. The first great printed book in Europe. Now watch the economics. Gutenberg printed around 180 copies. About 35 were on vellum, fine animal skin for rich buyers. Each one of those swallowed the skins of roughly 170 calves. Multiply that out, vellum alone could never scale. The herds of Europe couldn't print books in the thousands. But the other 145 copies? Paper, Italian rag paper, the stuff worn-out shirts were made into. One scribe, 1 year, one Bible, one press. 180 in about 3 years, most of them on linen rag. The machine worked because the paper was there to feed it. A secret this valuable doesn't stay in one city. In 1462, Mainz was sacked in a local war, its printers scattered, and they carried the craft with them. Cologne, Venice, Paris, Rome, then everywhere. By 1500, within one lifetime of that first Bible, printing presses were running in more than 200 European towns and cities, and every new press meant competition. Printers undercut each other. They hunted for new things to print and new people to sell to. Not just Bibles, grammar books, law books, medical guides, cheap pamphlets, stories. The price of a printed page started falling, and then it kept falling, and it didn't stop. Here's what 50 years of that looks like. Before the press, Europe's libraries held books in the tens of thousands, everyone copied by hand. By 1500, millions of printed volumes, nearly 28,000 different editions. Economists who study this period found that book prices just kept falling, year over year, decade over decade, for more than a century. For the first time in human history, knowledge got cheaper every single year. Think what that means. Everything your grandfather paid a fortune to glimpse, you could own. What he couldn't touch, your children would read for pennies. No invention had ever done that before. Most have never done it since. And now the payoff, not the machine, what the machine did. Reading stopped being a priest's skill. It became a merchant's skill, a craftsman's skill. Schools multiplied because for the first time, a school book cost less than a week's bread. Cities with printing presses pulled ahead of cities without them, measurably. They traded more. They learned faster. They grew faster. Ideas began crossing Europe in weeks instead of generations. Within decades, a single argument nailed to one church door could reach 1 million readers. The Reformation, and after it, scholars comparing identical printed pages across a continent. The slow birth of modern science. Europe learned to read, and it never, ever went back. So, why can you read? Because you were taught, of course. But the world where teaching you was normal, where books were cheap and letters were everywhere, that world had to be built. And some of its foundations were laid by a catastrophe nobody chose. The Black Death didn't invent the printing press. A stubborn goldsmith did that. But the plague rewired Europe's economics, wages, clothes, rags, paper, until a machine for copying words could actually pay for itself. That's what this chain reveals. History's biggest doors sometimes swing on the strangest hinges. Cheap knowledge didn't arrive when Europe got wise. It arrived when the numbers worked. Think you know 2 events that are secretly connected? Drop them below. Most liked comment gets the next video. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this.